Welcome to another edition of Inside the Zone alongside News Sentinel sports editor Tom Davis. I'm Glenn Marini, and not only this week are we going to talk about what happened in Week 2, we're going to look ahead to the NHC and ACAC schedules as they open up this week and begin conference play. But first, taking a look back at Week 2, obviously Week 1 you can have some aberrations, but in Week 2 you kind of start to feel out some teams. And what were your impressions of Week 2 and what we've learned so far this season?
Well, it was a shocker for a number of games this week, most notably Southside upsetting Snyder. They ran for 268 yards against a tough Snyder defense, and they did so with an injured Greg Johnson, who is their best rusher. And so that really just jumped out at me. Norwell beating Heritage was a bit of a shocker. It's a good rivalry, but the way they dominated them, Heritage didn't even score. That was another game that really jumped out at me. And then Eastside upsetting West Noble and getting a very important win for them going into conference play. That was a good game as well.
You mentioned Norwell because here's a team that is historically strong. They go 2-8 last year, and now through 2 weeks they've already got as many wins as they did last year. What is the key for them? Obviously, they've got a good running back, but their defense has been putting up some pretty good numbers.
Well, their defense is what won them the game last week. Clay Fichter did have, I think, 151 yards, but 147 of those came on 3 carries. The other 4 yards came on 24 carries. So they didn't even have him for 95% of the game last week as far as being an effective runner. But their defense was so dominant. They allowed Heritage to get all the way to the 1-yard line, but didn't let them in. So as long as their defense is strong, they're going to be in a lot of games.
And do we see kind of what they could do against Leo? Because you take a look at what the Lions did this past week, just dominating Whitco up at their place, putting up big offensive numbers like we thought they would. Is this Norwell defense maybe a little bit underrated at this point?
Oh, absolutely. Anybody can go into Heritage and shut them down. Shut them out is a tough team. Yeah.
One of the other surprises I know we talked about last week, you thought Rod Smith would get the SAC record. I'm not going to hold it over your head.
I was wrong.
He went in with needing 280. He got 72, but he did some other things that really kind of escalate him towards a more complete player than just the guy that runs the football.
Here's a funny thing. He won the game with his defense. He blocked a field goal attempt in the final minute to seal the win for them. And, yes, he had his 70 yards rushing. He was still effective, and he did the things he needed to do. He got the 2-point conversion on a run, which gave them the winning points. But he can do it on both sides of the ball. I mean, for him to break through and block that kick to save the game was unbelievable. And Coach Coltman of Northside was even like, we shut him down offensively, which is what we thought we had to do. Who knew he was going to do it defensively?
Is that kind of one of those things where people across the state maybe start to take a little bit more notice from the fact that he's not one-dimensional? It's just not a guy that you hand the football. Here's a guy that can affect the game on special teams, on defense, and do a lot of things, and maybe something that helps him down the road when people take a look at the stats and what he's done at the end of the season when they're voting for Mr. Football.
Oh, certainly. Somebody that can do both things. If he's just running the ball and that's all he does, well, there are a number of guys not quite as talented as him, but that can run the ball. But he receives the ball really well. He blocks really well, and obviously he can tackle as well, and on the defensive side of the ball. So, yeah, he's phenomenal. And the play before the blocked field goal, he intercepted it and ran it all the way back for a touchdown, but that was called back on a penalty. So, I mean, he can do everything.
And you mentioned the South Snyder game. Obviously, we both saw South play in Week 1. Dwenger pretty well dominated that ball game. How did they bounce back, and what kind of threat are they going to be the rest of the season in the SAC if they can knock off a Snyder team on an emotional night where they're honoring Russ Isaacs at Spooler Stadium?
I think they're the best team in the SAC that doesn't go by Bishop Dwenger. And Southside has the athleticism to cause problems for anybody in the league. In fact, this week's game against Lures is really going to be one to watch. But the thing is, they rode Greg Johnson in Week 1 for the success that they did have. They didn't have him in the second half this week, and they still were able to beat a great team in Snyder. So that's impressive that other guys, particularly the offensive line, stepped up and played that well. So Southside's for real.
And speaking of teams that are for real, Belmont, how much do we know about them at this point? They've scored 89 points. They've given up 6. They've been running the ball over everybody, but they haven't played the caliber that they're going to be playing in the next couple of weeks.
Right. I do think that Belmont and Homestead are the cream of the crop in their league, but Belmont hasn't been tested yet. I believe they play at Norwell in Week 4. We'll know more about Belmont after that game than we do right now. But, hey, give them credit. They're playing great right now.
Yeah, that's right. They got Columbia City this week. They'll be playing at Norwell,
Right.
so that could be a very good game. Both those teams could go in 3-0. We're going to learn a lot about, as you said, those two teams by then. But that'll do it for this portion of Inside the Zone. We're going to break down the upcoming conference races coming up next.